Three tasks that take up the most time are 1, managing candidate communications, 2, planning hiring manager meetings and interviews, 3, writing and sending outreach messages. Tasks that are time suckers, they're really taking up a lot of time, but they're also not the highest value activities for the most part.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenly, and welcome to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we have shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space, while other days, like today, we cover things like trending topics. Stop by every Tuesday for a Tactical Tuesday episode where we go deep on how to do something that's going to help you drive results in your day-to-day. Some days we open up for Q&A, and occasionally you get a mic drop episode from Matt where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. Now, as a reminder, if you like the content that we share here on the show, make sure that you subscribe for more. All right, today's trending topic. Tell me the last time you went on LinkedIn, you went on community, you went on a forum, and you saw some form of the question, is AI going to take over a recruiter's job? Every day, right? Short answer, what we've continued to say is no, it's not. But what has been really interesting to see in the past year of the sharp rise in AI has been recognizing just how much manual work recruiters are doing that could be automated. So for today, we have our trending topics co-host Lex Winship joining us to dive into what this world looks like, where, how many manual processes are recruiters spending a lot of time on, what opportunities are there to automate some of those, and most importantly, which of these should recruiters really be thinking about automating. So Lex, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. And like you said, there's a lot of conversation about whether Gen AI is going to take our jobs, how scared we should be of it. We hear this in the recruitment space. You and I are both marketers. We hear this all the time in our space as well. I think that sentiment and that fear drives a lot of resistance that then makes it harder to adopt the good things that these tools have to offer. And so this conversation is, we're going to be citing 2 reports that offer some insights into use cases for generative AI, but then also just kind of starting to break down a little bit of those preconceived notions of you either have to fear and avoid this thing entirely or embrace it entirely. And I think that there's some nuance and some room for us to kind of live in the gray area here. So that's ultimately my goal in this conversation, is painting a picture of, okay, how can we embrace some of the good without leaning too far in the direction of robots are ruling the world and we are all just here along for the ride.
Mm-hmm. Or to become robots ourselves.
Or yes, to become robots ourselves in a dystopian iRobot type of world. So no fear mongering here. It's just a good open conversation about some trends that we're noticing and some ways that we can kind of navigate this new territory that we're all, just swimming along in. So that being said, I'm going to start diving into just 2 of these reports. I'm going to paint a picture of what these 2 reports kind of aim to highlight, and then we can start to kind of dive into them and digest some of the data points a little bit and use those to kind of frame up our conversation. So the first one is the Talent Labs released a recruiter time and motion insight report. And the main goal of this report was to shed some light on how recruiters are spending their time. The report breaks things out into different recruiter types, 360 recruiters, coordinators and administrators, recruitment leads or managers, sourcers or resourcers, and then talent administration business partners. So there's different levels of recruiter that they dive into. And then they also break these data points out into organization, size, and type. So we're going to drop a link to this report in the show notes. If you have some specificity that you want to dig into even further, you're going to be able to find it in this report. For the sake of this conversation, we're going to be touching on averages, what, trends have been seen across all recruitment types and across all organization sizes. But again, there's a lot of nuance as you start to drill down into those different categories. So encourage you to find your niche and kind of explore that a little bit further within the report. So that's the first report we're going to be touching on. And then the second one is LinkedIn's Future of Recruiting report for 2024. This also has a ton of predictions, but then also kind of some of the data points that they're using to inform those predictions. And a lot of it is really interesting, especially taking these two reports together. You can start to notice some of these larger trends playing out, and it's really fascinating. So the biggest points that we'll make throughout this conversation are just one, recruiters are spending a lot of time on things that could be automated, whether for better or for worse. And the reality is that the recruitment landscape has shifted so much, and it's only going to continue to do so. And that's not just because of the rise of generative AI, but because the labor market has changed dramatically as well. So there's a lot of opportunity here for us to start to analyze how we're spending our time and identify areas where we can leverage tools that are available to us to become more efficient so that we can use our free time, or the time that has been freed up, to be a little bit more strategic and to, one, do better at our jobs today, but set ourselves up to do better at our jobs in the future, which is becoming increasingly important. So any initial thoughts before I start diving into these two reports a little bit further? I feel like I'm just monologuing.
No, this is why I love having you on. You take these reports and you're able to summarize them so well with these takeaways early on. But no, I'm glad to see that there's some data, because I think a lot of this, you said it's not fear mongering. A lot of the recruiters are just like, great, yeah, what's it gonna do? But when you realize the things that could be automated, I think they would be warmly welcomed by many recruiters. It's just like, oh, I don't have to do this, and I can do the things that I want to do for part of my work, for working with candidates, anything else. So I think this will actually be, it's the adoption curve of it's something new and different, but it's not a scary new and different. It's like, this is going to make you better new and different.
Exactly. It's the things that you complain about taking up all of your time that you can kind of now, the things that you said, I need an assistant to do this. Well, now you have one, and it's an assistant that you don't have to pay, or that you only have to pay a nominal fee to access. And then you are freed up to do the things that you're truly passionate about. And so, yeah, you bring up a really excellent point. So the first thing that I want to dive into is in the Recruiter Time and Motion report, they analyze and identify the tasks that take up the most of recruiters' time across recruitment types and all of that. And the three tasks that take up the most time are: one, managing candidate communications; two, planning hiring manager meetings and interviews; and three, writing and sending outreach messages. So not really a surprise, at least to me when I'm reading this. I'm thinking, yep, this lines up with a lot of the things that we hear on customer calls, the things that we've kind of identified as tasks that are time suckers. They're really taking up a lot of time, but they're also not the highest value activities for the most part. It's a lot of the administrative kind of menial tasks that set you up to be able to do the bigger picture task, managing communications and building these initial outreach sequences, not necessarily actually having conversations with candidates. And so a lot of the steps, the work before the work, essentially, these are the things that end up taking up more of your time than you realize, probably. And so the funny and interesting opportunity here is these are also three of the tasks that are easiest to automate. These are tasks that AI can do really well. They don't require a ton of human intervention. They're things that, as long as you know your process and you know the variables that you need to control for, you can really teach a generative AI tool to help do these tasks and free you up for the work that comes after that work.
Yeah. And as I'm looking at this table right here, we were saying there's different segments, right? The 360 recruiter, the sourcer. When you just look at the two, writing and sending outreach messages and managing candidate communications, across almost every single one of those, it's at least 10 hours per week of work. That's a quarter of your work week that's spent on these. So these aren't just like small, like clear up 30 minutes of your day and do this. We're talking about a quarter of your work week. Imagine if you had that time back for something. So again, we're not saying you're going to get all 10 hours back in this, but what if the writing and sending outreach messages, for example, on most of them, it ranges from about 4 to 5 hours per week. So an eighth of your work week. If you use a Gen AI, if you use something else, that might take that from 5 hours to 2 hours, and that's thing because one, we all know, and we will the first say, yes, we have GPT in our product, but we always say it gets you 80% of the way there. Go through, revise it, add in the human element, clean things up. GPT loves emojis these days, so remove half of the emojis. I don't know why they have such a love relationship with them, but like even just freeing up those 3 hours a week, and then those are the types of things that you can stack up for those wins to get into like what you do best. And I don't know, as I'm looking through and just eyeballing some of these different things that they don't spend a lot of time on, like in the operational bucket, like developer completing business cases, preparing or negotiating candidate offers, like those are the things that's what's going to make you money at the end of the day, and doing that. So how can you rearrange, reshuffle some of these buckets to make your hours just go longer in the day?
Definitely. You hit on something that I love to use as an example. As a writer, I had some of this initial resistance with ChatGPT, people starting to use these tools to write for them and to start to make the case for we don't need writers anymore. We have this tool that can write for us. And what I always love to tell people is I, have come around and have embraced ChatGPT and other generative AI tools to help me do that first 80%. But ultimately, you and I both know, if you build a blog post that is only written by ChatGPT, everyone can tell. It's got some dead giveaways, and also just from an anecdotal perspective, it can never tell the story as well as a human could. So this is where editing becomes so key, but that is strategic human time that needs to be spent on that task. The first 80% doesn't need to be as manual as we've treated it in the past. But that 20% becomes one, much more valuable, and two, a lot easier because you're setting yourself up to get there faster. So I have just started to say that 20% is the difference maker, and it's huge. That should not be undervalued because that 20% really is the kicker. But it's so nice to have kind of, I don't know sports terminology, but what's the thing where someone throws the ball up and the other person puts it in the hoop? I don't know.
Alley-oop. The alley-oop. Yeah.
It's like, this is your alley-oop. You still need to put it in the bucket, but it's helping you get a little bit closer. My husband is going to be so proud of me that I used a sports metaphor on this podcast episode. So I'm going to have to tell him.
We'll make sure he listens to this. One of our downloads on this episode will be him.
Exactly. But you kind of alley-ooped me there because I didn't know the name, and then you kind of pushed me over the edge.
Very meta of us.
We did it. Yeah. But no, you made a really great point about just kind of, okay, you've got these tasks, you're doing these things, and what is kind of the cost of that? It's, we talk a lot about the cost of inaction, but what's the cost of spending too much of your time on lower level activities and not having more of that time to spend on like the true money makers? And one thing that was really interesting from this report is across organizations of any size and segment, an average of 48% of time is spent on operational activities, which are, again, like the more strategic activities. So 52% of time is spent on things that don't fall into that bucket, more of the administrative tasks. And this is really interesting because, again, this is data that is averaged across all of the segments and all organization types and sizes. So this is really revealing a big opportunity in my eyes of, okay, 52% of time probably could be allocated a little bit more strategically and effectively. And that's a little bit scary to read or to hear at first. But then when you start to think about the opportunity there and how much more efficient and effective you could be if you started leaning into embracing some of these tools, it's a really cool opportunity.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's the blessing and curse of tech at the end of the day, right? The more tech you add, the more admin that you add, and that's more time that's spent pulling away from the strategy. And ironic, we're a tech company talking about, hey, you probably shouldn't use as much tech, and that's where it comes back to. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish at the end of the day with your job? And then when you map out the time, I know no one really likes to do, if you have to do like time sheeting for yourself, everyone who's ever done it is just like rolling their eyes thinking about how terrible it is. But if you did this for yourself, even for a couple of days, I bet you would quickly realize just how much time you are spending on some of this admin stuff. You're just like, whoa, I didn't realize it was quite that much. And I bet you would quickly be open to saying like, okay, like what are the options out there to do this? And before we go say like more tech, like kind of defeat the purpose of that. But, some things I don't think it's either it's going to be the tech, it's just going to be reworking your workflow itself or seeing, where do you have overlaps of different pieces of tech, different processes that you're already doing, that you could probably start to pull some of those other things out, consolidate, and thinking about like what really is most effective for me, what I'm trying to accomplish. And then if I map that out, what would that look like in this future world?
Yeah, for sure. So the next step that I kind of want to get into is just, again, expanding on some of those opportunities. So some data points that come from this report that I take to mean, okay, here's an interesting way that we can start as recruiters to differentiate ourselves, to start building new skill sets. There are a percentage of respondents who do not complete certain tasks. So these are recruiters who do not do the following. And so the tasks with the lowest number of people completing them were: one, completing business cases, which 41% of respondents across the board did not do; creating employer brand assets, which 41% across the board did not do; writing content for emails, 35% of recruiters did not do; and writing copy for website landing pages, 35% of recruiters did not do. So these are the tasks that the least number of recruiters studied conduct. And I feel like this is a really interesting conversation because these are tasks that, in my view, really prove a deep understanding of the big picture. They're very much these like 360 type tasks where you're kind of looking at not just the task in front of you, but playing the long game. It's something that we talk about at Loxo all the time. It's something that you and I have talked about in this podcast multiple times. These are the big picture things that really start to add a level of sophistication to your company, to your workflow, that really make a huge difference. And so I look at, starting to offload some of the more administrative, the more menial tasks to AI. You start to free up more space to do the activities that your peers, your competitors are not dedicating time to. And this is where you really start to differentiate yourself, to really make a strong case for why your business is the stronger choice when this is a competitive market. Those differentiators can be so key. So I really love kind of looking at it in that way of, okay, this is what people aren't doing. That means I have the opportunity to start doing this thing and be ahead of 41% of, my competitors.
Yeah. And the easiest way I always like to think of that is you put it that way is like, you don't have to be better at your competitors on this. You just have to do it. And you're going to win automatic like that already. Like you're already going head and shoulders above what they're doing because they're simply not able to pull this type of thing off. So I know we don't like the term like low hanging fruit and that type of wording, but it really is these easy opportunities for you to take advantage of when you can start to figure out like, okay, how can we balance some of this other tech AI, get rid of just that menial tasks that we have to do every day.
Exactly. And on the flip side of that, the tasks that had the largest number of respondents completing them, aka most recruiters do these tasks. This will sound repetitive and redundant. 1, managing candidate communications. 2, creating and sharing social media posts. And 3, planning hiring manager meetings and interviews. So these are very reminiscent of the tasks that we listed at the beginning that take the most time and that also are the easiest to automate. So everyone's doing these things, which means they're just kind of baseline. You've got to do them in order to be successful. How can we start to optimize those things so that we can free up more space for the things that most people aren't doing and that we can start to set ourselves apart? So I don't know, lots of good opportunity there. I think that is the most encouraging thing about this report is there's still so much opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you've hit it dead on right there. Let's look at this and see, what can we do with this versus let's be scared of this.
Exactly. And so just to kind of further back this up, I'm going to just dig into a couple of quick stats from LinkedIn's Future of Recruiting report from this year. This, I think, really bolsters up a lot of the data points that we've just touched on and starts to paint a bigger picture of opportunities for using AI, for starting to expand skill sets and use that to our advantage. So basically, through this report, the recruiting pros were kind of asked about different ways that they are using Gen AI tools and the biggest benefits that they've seen from starting to use Gen AI tools. And the biggest benefit that all of the recruiters who were participating in this report cited was the ability to write job descriptions faster and more easily. 57% of respondents who use generative AI said that that was the biggest value point. The other things that they said were a huge difference maker were automating tasks to spend more time on fulfilling work, removing daily mundane tasks, improving overall productivity, and it's faster and easier to engage first touch with candidates, getting that first communication before you start to like actually develop a relationship. So I thought that was really interesting. And again, nothing groundbreaking, but really supports a lot of the things that we've been talking about time and time again on this podcast and all of Loxo's communications, and then also just really supporting a lot of the data points we just dove into. One thing that I thought was really, really interesting, and I loved hearing this, is Randstad has actually started launching training programs to teach its recruiters how to use generative AI effectively. That to me is a huge proof point of the fact that one, generative AI is not going anywhere. It is going to be something that becomes deeply integrated into the recruitment world, whether we like it or not. And so seeing really large staffing firms start to embrace this and start to train their team on this, to me, is proof of the fact that, yeah, we've got to start taking this seriously. One of their chief executives said, "We want to be in a place where a significant base of our people understand and are excited about the disruptive potential of partnering with AI." So again, I found this really fascinating. I think that this would be such an awesome opportunity for staffing firms, recruiting agencies of all sizes to start just kind of creating these training programs. And again, easier said than done. There's only so many hours in the day, but as you start to use AI to offload some of these administrative tasks, you start to free up more space to learn how to use it more effectively. So it's this kind of really interesting and productive feedback loop that I'm really excited about.
Hmm. I mean, it's definitely, that says something, when you have the largest organizations who, when you think of large organizations, usually very slow moving, slow to adopt new tech, new processes, anything else. So they're not ignoring it, and they're seeing it as, as they said, like excited about the potential of partnering with AI to create advantages with our team members and what they can accomplish. So yeah, I think that speaks in itself to the value of it. So it was funny seeing, you said the 57% said, one top benefits of Gen AI is faster, easier to write job descriptions, but they don't have any other points in here about like using it to writing outreach, writing biz dev. So that's just an interesting use case. But as soon as you read that one, my mind immediately went to, okay, if they're using Gen AI to write better job descriptions, I know that's also one of the things that most recruiters have always said. It's just like writing job descriptions is boring. Mitch Sullivan always talks about like difference between job descriptions, job ads, and how to write them well. Most of them aren't that great. But what this does, if you're able to use this, you can spend more time on the job intake, because what that intake is going to do, input is your output for Gen AI. Get a better intake. You can put that into Gen AI. Your job description is going to get better. The amount of time spent writing it is going to significantly go down. But what's going to happen then is, if you're a 360 recruiter or if you have a larger team, sourcing time is going to be faster, because you're going to have so many more data points on like who are the exact people that we want to work with. The number of quality candidates is going to be higher as a result, and you're probably going to see higher quality of hire. I know it's a vague term that we've discussed on the podcast different time, just go with it for now. You're going to see usually like faster time to hire because of what you're able to surface. So this is how are you reutilizing that time to just improve everything overall? And there's no downside in any of that right there, other than the initial learning curve of just how can we embrace this new type of tool. When people move from the typewriter to the computer, oh my God, I can't do this. Like, I only know my typewriter. Like, we're going to do it in time. There's going to be some tech that just sticks around. And once you embrace and adopt that, like, the sky is really the limit for just what does this mean for our workflow? How can we improve? How can we reshift and reallocate our time to be effective? And I think this is going to be one of those times in history when we look back on and say, like, when the internet first came about, when the PC, laptop, any of those came about, like, I think this is going to be another point there.
Totally. And you touched on kind of the vague term of quality of hire. This is actually an interesting use case for AI as well, as a lot of recruitment leaders and talent acquisition professionals are starting to use AI to analyze candidates, to analyze hires that have been made, and start to identify key points of overlap between them that are on more of the soft skill side. So as you're doing candidate assessments, you're being really thorough about what kind of documentation you're putting in there. And then you're running reports that kind of start to show you these points of overlap that you might not have identified if you were just scanning them yourself. So one of the use cases that a lot of people are claiming is that AI can actually help us firm up some of these vague terms that we've thrown around and used for ages, but have kind of been not using necessarily the same definition. We start to standardize, at least for an organization or for a team, what does quality of hire mean? What does an A player look like? Well, we can look back and see success rates and start to identify key factors that we want to be on the lookout for when we are assessing candidates in the future. So I didn't even put this in the notes because I know we've harped on quality of hire quite a bit, but the fact that you brought that up, I'm like, this is actually an interesting opportunity for AI as well. So
that will be fascinating to see what comes of that.
Exactly. And I think it is one of those things, we've talked about kind of the hell yes metric and just kind of thinking through, again, that long game approach of analyzing performance a year after the fact, not letting things die just like once a placement is made. How can you start to use that data to inform your strategy moving forward? Again, I think that this is a really cool opportunity, one, for really good data integrity. This is so important. It becomes increasingly important if you're relying on AI to start analyzing your data. You've got to have good data to do that and to have faith in it. But then also just, again, for informing your strategy moving forward. So love that you brought that up. One thing that I think is really exciting here is I love this data point. LinkedIn found that there has been a 30% increase in skill similarity across all recruiting roles in the past 5 years, which means a lot of these different recruiting roles previously looked very different. They were very distinct from one another. In the past 5 years, there's been a lot more melding of tasks, recruiters taking on new roles, recruiters kind of taking on new skills and starting to develop those skill sets regardless of what their title is. And I think that this is a really interesting proof of the fact that, one, recruiters in general are becoming a lot more cross-functional. And I think that AI pushes that even further and almost forces that even more. And I think that as you start to develop these skills, it makes it easier for you to pivot and to move into different roles, to flex up on certain things when there's need there, and to kind of shift priorities. As we've seen, it's very, the job market is kind of crazy. It's a little bit difficult to figure out when certain swings are going to happen in one area and when they're going to happen in another. And so while we still say it's good to niche down and really understand, the market that you're working with, it also becomes increasingly important to diversify and to be building these skill sets that help you become more cross-functional. Erin Scruggs, she's the head of global talent acquisition at LinkedIn. She said, every recruiter needs to be able to be flexible and deploy into hotspots versus specializing in specific domains. We didn't do that a year ago, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, but it's critical now for staying agile. So again, being able to quickly adapt to changing needs and priorities is becoming increasingly important. And again, this is an area where, as you are starting to free up more of your time that was spent on mundane, menial, administrative tasks, you start to free up time not just for making more placements, but learning and developing and growing skill sets that help you be more strategic and more valuable moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So whether, you're, a 1 or 2 person shop where, you used to focus on a specific type of role, industry, tides change with the economy, you need to go and switch to a different one. That gives you the flexibility. If you're at a large staffing firm and you want to oversee a large team, you have that knowledge on how they all work, how they come together. So yeah, the upside of this across, like, no matter where you are in your career, where you want to be in your career, the type of organization you're at within staffing and recruiting, again, it's interesting to see that melding come back together around from the hard specialisms that everyone started to break out to into for a bit.
Exactly. And I think that this is kind of the flip side of jack of all trades, master of none. It's like, no, you actually can become a master of several different things as long as you have time to invest, in learning and understanding the nuances of these different tasks, these different markets, these different specialties. And so I think that there's a really cool opportunity for recruiters to upskill in ways that make them more valuable, that make them more cross-functional, and that make them more dynamic team players. I think, again, we talk about becoming strategic partners to hiring teams. And this is a really awesome way to do that, to be a strategic partner and to just kind of elevate your role a little bit. So again, there's a lot of fear around AI. And I think that those are valid fears because there are things that are going to become replaced. And the recruiters who are unwilling to grow and learn and adapt and start to leverage new technology are going to struggle. They're going to suffer. And some of those tasks will be replaced. And so I think that instead of using this as just a fear-based response, we need to start recognizing the reality for what it is. This is not going away. And instead, how can I use this to level up? How can I leverage these tools to upskill and to become a more strategic partner moving forward? And I think that there is a lot of opportunity for that to be the case.
Oh yeah, I love it. And I know you're saying, fear at the beginning. This to me, this is an episode that gives me so much hope and optimism for where recruiters can go and recruitment can go. So yeah, no, I'm glad that we could hash all this out and bring it to light. So anything else before we wrap this one up?
No, I think the biggest thing I would say is just, again, opportunity is out there. Things feel scary and uncertain right now. And anytime new technology enters the space, can you imagine editors when spell check was invented were probably freaking out? Like, what am I going to do? This is replacing me. This is my bread and butter. This is my life. This is my livelihood. But at the end of the day, these new technologies come and they enhance our lives and they make things easier. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity if we start to embrace this. What is more human than strategy? That to me is the most human task that you could possibly be investing your time in. So my point of view is whatever I can do to free up more time to be more strategic, I'm open to. And at first it might be hard to adapt to that, but you're going to be better for it. And so I think that that's the biggest takeaway I'd like people to have here is this isn't about replacing you. This is about replacing some of the things that you do that are not the most effective use of your time. And so use it as a tool and see what happens, just be open. That's my biggest call.
I love it. Chef's kiss, as we always like to do in our little Slack emojis. So cool. Well, this was a really good conversation. I'm glad that we got to hash it all out. So as always, I appreciate you, finding these great articles, research papers, topics for us to come in and just discuss with others who might not have the time or, give them a different angle to think about it. So Lex, thank you as always for joining.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, as we wrap, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. If you love this episode and you're not sure where to go next, we've got a link to a similar one in the show notes, and you can find those in the description of your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website. Full video episodes are available on YouTube. If you ever have questions, send them to us, podcast@loxo.co. And lastly, if you did enjoy this episode, please make sure to leave us a quick rating in your podcast streaming platform. It only takes you 3 seconds, but it's going to help other recruiters like you to find us. So everyone, that's the show. That was another great Trending Topics episode with Lex. Until next time, bye y'all.